The sun hung low over the dusty town of Red Willow, casting long, uneven shadows across the wooden sidewalks and weather-beaten facades of the shops. Heat rippled off the dirt streets, carrying the faint scent of hay, horses, and wood smoke. Among the muted clamor of carts and horseshoes clanging against hard earth, a woman moved alone, her figure slight, yet unmistakably weary. Her dress, once a delicate cream, was now faded and stretched across the curve of her body, softened by the life growing beneath her heart. Her hair, dark and thick, was drawn back in a practical braid, though a few stubborn strands escaped, framing her pale, resolute face. She was not a woman the townsfolk spoke of kindly. Already pregnant and round with it, her form had made her a target, a symbol of shame for a society obsessed with appearances. She had been left, abandoned, before the scandal had even fully arrived, her lover gone like a phantom with no name and no promises kept. The whispers began the moment she stepped into the market, and they followed her with relentless persistence. See, there, the woman who spoiled herself with her own folly. Is that child hers, or did she borrow it from sin itself? Children tugged at their mother's skirts, glancing with wide eyes at the unusual shape of her belly, and men in the saloon smirked cruelly, raising their whiskey glasses as though to toast some private joke at her expense. She kept her head low, fingers gripping the basket she carried, filling it with potatoes, beans, and what meager staples she could afford. Every step was heavy, not just with the burden of her growing body, but with the weight of judgment, a suffocating atmosphere of disgust. She could neither fight nor flee. Even the wind seemed complicit, stirring dust into her path and wrapping it around her feet, as if to pin her to the ground. Her stepmother's cabin sat at the edge of town, a crumbling relic of a once proud family. The woman inside did not meet her eyes when she entered, instead fanning the heat from the stove with a wooden spatula and muttering prayers under her breath. "You've brought nothing but shame here," the stepmother said, her voice sharp and brittle. "We were better off before you arrived, carrying that child." The word child fell like a hammer, reminder that life itself could be wielded as weaponized shame. The heroine did not respond. Words had never been her strongest armor, and against cruelty, silence was sometimes the only shield she possessed. She set the basket down, hands trembling as she began to wash the few dishes left in the sink, her eyes tracing the chipped edges of the table, the cracked floorboards, and the peeling wallpaper, as though mapping the terrain of her exile. "Do you think he'll come back?" Her younger stepsister sneered from the corner, a cruel smirk curling her lips. "He never wanted you, and everyone knows it. Now you're fat, useless, and carrying a sin with you wherever you go." The heroine's stomach knotted with a mixture of fear and sorrow, but she lifted her chin slightly. She would not give them the satisfaction of tears. She had learned, painfully, that in Red Willow, mercy was a luxury and compassion a weakness to be exploited. That evening, the small town swelled with heat and tension. The church bells rang, though no hymns were sung for her. Instead, they tolled with a hollow clang, marking the hours as if the world itself had turned against her. She returned to the cabin's porch, cradling her belly against the slow, creeping dusk, and watched the wind push through the fields beyond. The open plains seemed inviting, vast, and forgiving in a way the town never could be. But she could not leave. Not yet. She had nowhere else to go. And then came the final blow. Her stepfather, a man whose broad shoulders and loud voice had once inspired fear even in the neighboring ranchers, leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, eyes dark with anger and disdain. "You've brought shame upon this house for the last time," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You're not welcome here anymore. Pack what you can carry and leave before sundown. We do not want to see you, and we will not see the child either. Go." Her chest tightened, and for a moment she allowed herself a flicker of hopelessness. She thought of the nights she had spent alone, working the fields, tending to animals, praying for just a moment of understanding from anyone, family, neighbor, stranger. She had believed there might be mercy, a soft hand or gentle word to guide her. But Red Willow was ruthless. It offered only judgment and exile. By mid-afternoon, she was forced into the street, carrying what little she could, her swollen figure a beacon for ridicule. The neighbors' whispers became louder, sharp enough to cut, but she ignored them, drawing her shawl tight around her shoulders. Every step away from the cabin felt like a final severing from a world that had never truly welcomed her. Even the sky seemed complicit, the clouds dark and heavy, as if reflecting the sorrow settling over her like a cloak. And yet, amid the storm of scorn and the taste of dust in her mouth, a pair of keen eyes watched her from the edge of town. From atop a ridge, a rider on a black horse shaded under the sparse brush surveyed the unfolding scene. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and silent, an outsider by appearance, yet his eyes were sharp and unyielding. He had seen injustice in Red Willow before. He had seen cruelty masked as morality, and he did not approve. She had not noticed him, and he did not call out. Instead, he lingered on the ridge, studying her with a mixture of caution and admiration. He could see the way her back straightened with stubborn pride, how she lifted her chin despite the sneers, how she carried herself with a grace that no one in the town could diminish. She was alone, vulnerable, yet not defeated. As the sun sank behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, the heroine stumbled upon a small clearing just beyond town. She sank to her knees in the tall grass, letting herself breathe, letting her tears come quietly. The world had abandoned her, her family had rejected her, and society had deemed her unworthy. Yet, even in the shadow of betrayal, something flickered, a fragile ember of defiance that would not die. The townsfolk of Red Willow had left her for already being pregnant and fat. They had written her off, judged her, before she could even defend herself. But the rider on the ridge, unseen and silent, was about to prove that not all men were cruel, that there were some who understood the weight of injustice and who would not let harm come to the innocent without consequence. And somewhere in the gathering twilight, a promise hovered, unspoken but potent, waiting for the right moment. If anyone touches her, they'll pay. The following morning, the town of Red Willow stirred under a pale, cold light that spilled through the dusty streets like a reluctant promise. The heroine, still cradling her swelling belly, made her way cautiously toward the general store. Her feet left faint impressions in the hard-packed dirt, tiny evidence of her existence in a town that preferred she vanish. Each step drew whispers, glances sharpened with judgment, and a few cruel chuckles. Yet she moved steadily, head high, as though daring the world to see her for more than what they wanted to call her, a fallen, fat, abandoned woman. It was in the shadow of the store that she first noticed him, not in the center of town, not in the obvious places, but leaning against the corner post of the livery stable. He was a stranger to these streets, yet his presence carried authority, unspoken and undeniable. A broad-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, but the way he observed the town, the way he studied her, revealed a quiet attentiveness. He was a man who did not need to speak to command notice, yet something about him radiated a controlled fire, a readiness to act without hesitation. The heroine paused mid-step, sensing rather than seeing the gaze that followed her. Her heart skipped, not from fear alone, but from curiosity and a flicker of hope. She had spent months believing that mercy, kindness, or protection were luxuries meant for someone else, not her. And yet here in the dusty streets of a cruel town, there stood a man who seemed to recognize both her vulnerability and her strength. The first true test came soon after. A group of young ranch hands, boisterous and drunk on early morning whiskey, spotted her crossing the street. Well, one of them sneered, gesturing to her belly. Looks like someone's been playing house without the proper gentleman to back her up. Another laughed, nudging her with the barrel of his boot. The heroine froze, caught between instinct and fear. She had learned the hard way that arguing or pleading invited more cruelty than silence ever did. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders, readying herself to step past, to endure, to survive. But before their taunts could escalate further, a low voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's far enough." The words were calm, measured, yet carried an unmistakable authority that made the men falter. They turned slowly, following the direction of the voice, and saw him, the stranger from the livery corner. He strode toward them with long, deliberate steps, eyes dark and unflinching, the sun catching the worn leather of his coat and the sheen of his boots. The tallest of the drunk men smirked, trying to assert dominance. "And who might you be, stranger? This ain't your concern." The man's gaze remained steady. "It is now," he said, his tone quiet but lethal in its implication. "She's under my protection. You lay a hand on her, and there will be consequences you won't live to regret." A ripple of unease ran through the group. They had expected a weak woman, a target for amusement or lust, yet this stranger radiated an unspoken promise of retaliation. One of them, bolder than the rest, laughed nervously, stepping closer. "And what, pray tell, are you going to do? Tell the whole town we're fools." The man's hand rested lightly on the hilt of a revolver at his hip, but his posture suggested he would prefer brains over bullets. "I don't need the town," he said. "I just need one man to remember today." His eyes locked on the instigator, unyielding, almost cold in their intensity. The laughter faltered, swallowed by a sudden tension that hung in the air, heavier than the midday sun. Without another word, the group dispersed, muttering and uneasy, leaving the heroine standing alone in the street, yet now shielded by the presence of this stranger. Relief washed over her, but so did a strange, unfamiliar sensation, gratitude mixed with the flutter of something like admiration or trust. She had not felt this protected in months, perhaps years. He approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance. His eyes softened as they met hers. "Are you hurt?" he asked, the first truly gentle words she had heard in a long time. She shook her head, voice small and uncertain. "No, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're not safe just because they've gone. This town, it doesn't forgive easily." She swallowed, her gaze dropping to the dirt at her feet. "I've learned that the hard way." He nodded, understanding more than she expected. "Then you'll need a place to stay. Away from here, somewhere they won't find you. You'll need work, food, and a safe roof above your head. I can provide that." She hesitated, instinct warning her that accepting help might bring new complications. She had been let down before, abandoned when she needed trust the most. But his presence felt different, steadier, unshakable. She found herself nodding slowly. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," he said firmly, yet there was warmth beneath the certainty. "I'm not asking for thanks. I'm asking for you to survive." Over the next few days, the heroine began to learn the rhythms of his life. His homestead, just beyond the edge of town, was modest but sturdy, a cabin of rough-hewn logs surrounded by fenced pasture and grazing animals. He worked the land with hands as skilled at nurturing as they were at defending, caring for the horses and cattle, tending small crops, and maintaining a quiet order that contrasted sharply with the chaos of Red Willow. She found solace in this structure, in the simplicity and integrity of labor alongside him. Her body ached, her belly a constant reminder of her vulnerability, but each day she felt a little less invisible, a little less scorned. The townsfolk's whispers could not reach her here, and for the first time in months she felt the possibility of a life without constant judgment. And yet tension lingered. The heroine's fear of attachment warred with the growing sense of safety and admiration she felt for him. She watched him from across the fields as he tended to the animals, noting the way he moved, calm, efficient, always alert, and she felt something unfamiliar. Desire, yes, but also trust, a deep-seated knowledge that he would not betray her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and set the plains ablaze with amber and crimson, they sat by the fire, quiet and companionable. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, steam curling into the cooling air. "You've done well today," he said simply. "The cows were skittish, the fence needed mending, yet you handled both." She flushed slightly and used praise. "It's nothing," she murmured. "Nothing?" His brow arched slightly, but his eyes remained kind. "It's everything. Every day you survive this world, every day you fight to protect yourself and the child you carry, that is everything." Her throat tightened. No one had ever seen her this way, acknowledged her courage without judgment, without pity. She wanted to speak, to tell him how it felt to be recognized, but words failed her. He leaned back, letting the firelight illuminate his face. "I mean what I said before," he added quietly, voice low and resolute. "If anyone touches you, there will be reckoning. You are not to be harmed. Not by these men, not by anyone. That is my promise." The heroine felt a shiver pass through her, a mix of relief, awe, and something deeper she could not yet name. It was a promise built not on words alone, but on conviction, strength, and unwavering moral certainty. A promise she had not dared hope for in a world that had only offered betrayal. And so life began to take on a new rhythm. She worked the land, tended the animals, and felt her body move with purpose again. He remained near, a quiet sentinel, never overbearing, but always present. Their exchanges were careful, measured, yet each glance, each word, layered with meaning. Trust was being built, slowly, brick by brick, in the silent spaces between labor and quiet moments under the open sky. But even as comfort began to settle in, a shadow lingered. The town of Red Willow, still alive with whispers, still hungry for scandal, still poised to strike. And somewhere deep in her chest, a nervous anticipation pulsed. The knowledge that protection would be tested, that danger would come again, and that this strange, quiet man who had chosen to stand with her would not merely offer safety, but insist on justice no matter the cost. The flicker of hope in her heart was small, delicate, yet it was enough. And in the distance, beyond the horizon, the sun bled its final colors across the plains, a reminder that life could still be beautiful, even amid dust, judgment, and betrayal. Winter had begun to settle over the plains, dusting the fields with frost that sparkled like crushed diamonds in the morning light. The heroine had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life on the outskirts of the town, yet every day brought new challenges. The stretch of land she now called home was harsh and unyielding, but under the hero's watchful eyes, it had become a place of safety, a haven where judgment and ridicule could not reach her. She rose before dawn, tending to the animals, filling the troughs, and mending fences, her body aching but steady. Every task, every effort, was a small act of reclamation, proof that she could exist, could survive, and could even thrive in a world that had deemed her worthless. Despite the hard labor, her days were punctuated with moments that reminded her of life beyond mere survival. The hero would sometimes pause beside her, leaning on a fence post, the cold wind tousling his hair. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He taught her to read the sky, to anticipate storms, to listen to the subtle cues of horses and cattle alike. He corrected her gently, praised her when deserved, and never once made her feel inadequate. These lessons were more than survival. They were lessons in trust, in strength, and in quiet partnership. Yet, even in this remote place, the shadow of her past lingered. Townsfolk had not forgotten her, and rumors traveled faster than any horse could ride. A rival suitor, one scorned by her family and fueled by jealousy, had caught wind of her refuge. One evening, as she drew water from the well, his voice rang out across the frozen field, taunting and cruel. "Thought you could hide, did you? Thought no one would find you here?" Her heart seized, fear clawing at her chest, but she did not falter. From the corner of her eye, she saw the hero emerge from the barn, a dark silhouette framed by the fading light. His boots crunched on the frosted grass, steady and deliberate, and the rival paused, sensing the shift in power before he could react. "This woman is not yours to claim, nor anyone else's," the hero said, voice low and unyielding. "Leave, or you'll learn the price of trespassing." The rival laughed, nervously, glancing around to see if any of the other ranch hands would intervene. None dared approach. The hero's presence alone was enough to command obedience. The rival spat on the frozen ground and fled, muttering threats that were powerless against the weight of a man who had already promised protection. Later, as the heroine warmed her hands by the fire, she felt a surge of gratitude and awe she had not allowed herself before. "I don't know how you do it," she murmured. "How you keep calm when the world is so cruel." He shook his head, stirring the coals with a stick. "I don't keep calm. I choose where to spend my energy." You deserve that energy, not the scorn of fools." That evening, their conversation drifted into quieter territory. She found herself speaking of her fears, the loneliness that had shadowed her for months, and the shame that had been heaped upon her like stones. The hero listened, never interrupting, his eyes holding a depth that made her feel seen in ways words could not capture. It was in these moments, under the quiet stars and the embers of the dying fire, that something unspoken began to bloom, a tentative, fragile affection that neither dared name, yet both felt pressing against the confines of their shared silence. Winter grew harsher. Snow fell in relentless sheets, coating the plains and the cabin roof, turning the world into a crystalline wilderness. The heroine's belly expanded, a constant reminder of vulnerability and the life she carried. Simple chores became exhausting, and worry gnawed at her about the child she would raise in such unforgiving isolation. Yet the hero remained steadfast, adapting to the snowbound conditions, chopping firewood, hauling water, and ensuring the cabin remained warm and secure. His quiet strength became a tether for her, a steadying presence in the turbulence of her emotions. One particularly bitter night, a blizzard howled outside, rattling the cabin's thin walls. The heroine shivered, wrapped in blankets, staring at the firelight dancing across the logs. The hero entered, snow melting off his coat, and handed her a mug of thick, hot cocoa. "Drink this," he said, sitting beside her. His proximity was comforting, though it stirred a restlessness within her she did not yet understand. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, voice barely audible over the wind. He met her gaze evenly. "Because some things are worth defending. You are worth defending." She felt her chest tighten, a warmth blooming that was more than the fire's glow. There was no pretense here, no shallow sentimentality, only a steadfast commitment that made her heart ache in ways she had not expected. Days later, another threat arrived, not from a rival, but from the town itself. A group of men, emboldened by alcohol and ignorance, had followed rumors of her refuge. They arrived at the outskirts of the hero's land, jeering and shouting, expecting an easy confrontation. The heroine froze, fear clawing at her, but the hero moved first. He stood at the cabin's threshold, boots planted firmly, revolver in hand, eyes cold and unyielding. "They've come for me," she whispered, voice trembling. "They've come for what they think they own," he said softly. "But you are no one's property." The confrontation was swift and decisive. The hero's movements were precise, non-lethal where possible, yet utterly commanding. He did not strike out of anger, but out of necessity, enforcing a boundary the men had no right to cross. The heroine watched, heart hammering, and realized something profound. Protection was not simply about shielding her from harm, but about allowing her to reclaim power, to see herself as someone who could live without fear. After the men were sent running, defeated and humiliated, the heroine finally allowed herself to exhale, leaning against him as the adrenaline ebbed. The firelight flickered across their faces, highlighting the lines of weariness and strength alike. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. He shook his head, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. You need to live. That's enough." The days stretched into weeks. Snow melted into early spring, and with it, the heroine began to see herself differently. She learned to ride the horse under his guidance, the animal's rhythm teaching her balance and courage. She discovered the joy of planting seeds in the softening earth, watching life grow in a world that had once sought only to diminish her. With each passing day, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, brick by brick, replaced with trust, admiration, and a quiet, tender affection that both terrified and thrilled her. The hero's presence was constant, but never overbearing. He would give her space, yet his gaze always lingered protective and warm. Their hands brushed over fence posts, over buckets of water, over the reins of horses, and each touch was electric, not in passion alone, but in the intimacy of shared labor, shared danger, and shared survival. One evening, under a sky blazing with a golden sunset, the heroine paused in the field, her hand resting on her belly. She felt a shift within herself, a new understanding that life could be precious, even when cruel, that love could exist beyond shame, and that a man could see her worth without question. The hero approached silently, stopping a few feet away. He did not speak immediately, simply observing her in the soft light. Then, as if compelled by the moment, he stepped closer, placing a gloved hand lightly over hers. "You are stronger than you know," he said, voice low and steady. "And you are not alone." Tears pricked her eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief, recognition, and the first spark of hope. She lifted her gaze to meet his, seeing not judgment, not pity, but a promise that stretched far beyond words. A promise of protection, of trust, and of something slowly, painfully beautiful that neither of them had yet named. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying with it the scent of new growth and distant rain. In that moment, the heroine felt the stirrings of her heart awakening, fragile yet insistent, ready to embrace a life she had not dared imagine, one where she could be seen, loved, and protected, not despite her past or her body, but because of the courage she had carried all along. And somewhere beyond the hills, in the quiet of the fading light, the town of Red Willow simmered with discontent, unaware that the woman they had scorned was no longer defenseless. She had found a guardian, a companion, and a reflection of a strength that had always been within her. The stage was set, the heart had awakened, and the trials yet to come would test them both, but for the first time, she faced them with a measure of hope, trust, and an unexpected sense of love stirring like the first green shoots of spring. Spring had arrived in earnest. The plains shimmered with new life. Wildflowers pushed stubbornly through the thawing soil, and the air smelled of rain-soaked earth and fresh grass. The heroine moved through the fields with newfound strength, her steps steady, her back straighter than it had been in months. She was no longer merely surviving, she was thriving. The child within her moved with quiet insistence, a heartbeat that mirrored her own growing courage. Yet the past, relentless as the river during a spring thaw, refused to be silenced. Word of her refuge and her protector had spread, reaching ears in Red Willow that had not forgotten the shame they had delighted in. A contingent of men, led by the same rival who had once mocked her in the frozen field, arrived at the edge of her sanctuary. Their approach was deliberate, fueled by jealousy, greed, and the town's stubborn sense of ownership over a woman they had long condemned. The heroine felt her chest tighten, but this time, fear was tempered by the presence of the man who had become her anchor. The hero had anticipated the confrontation. He had read the signs, predicted the movements, and prepared not only for their safety, but for the preservation of her dignity. His revolver was holstered, but his stance radiated authority and readiness. "They've come for me again," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension curling in her stomach. "They think so," he replied, his dark eyes unwavering. "But this time, they'll find that some promises are meant to be kept." The first man stepped forward, swaggering, his face contorted in mockery. "Thought you could hide behind him, didn't you?" he spat. "This woman belongs to the town. She's ours to shame." The hero's jaw tightened. "No, she belongs to herself." His voice carried like a whip across the open plain, halting the men mid-step. "You've come to harm her? Then you will face the consequences. I warned you once. Consider this your last chance." One of the men scoffed, raising a hand in challenge. The hero moved, but not with haste. Every motion was deliberate, calculated, a blend of patience and precision. With a single, commanding gesture, the threat dissolved. The men, sensing the unyielding force before them, faltered. The rival's smirk cracked, replaced by unease, as he realized the hero's promise was not idle words, but a vow carved from principle and strength. The confrontation ended without bloodshed, but it left an indelible mark. The heroine's heart, once fearful and guarded, swelled with gratitude and awe. She watched him return to her side, boots crunching over the thawing ground, and she realized the truth that had been stirring quietly in her heart. She was no longer alone, no longer powerless, and no longer defined by the scorn of others. That evening, under the vast canopy of a cobalt sky streaked with the first hints of twilight, the heroine sat by the fire, tending to a small meal. The hero joined her, a careful calm settling over them. Words were few, yet the silence between them spoke volumes. He handed her a warm cup of tea, their fingers brushing in a moment that lingered, charged with unspoken understanding. "You were magnificent today," he said softly, eyes holding hers with a depth that made her pulse quicken. "Not because of me, but because of you. You faced fear and stood your ground." She swallowed, feeling the sting of emotion she could no longer contain. "I didn't think I could," she admitted. "Not until you." He shook his head, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I only kept my word. The courage came from you all along." The fire crackled between them, warm embers casting flickering light across their faces. For the first time, she let herself truly breathe, shedding the weight of guilt, shame, and fear. Here, in this simple cabin on the edge of the wild, she was seen not as a scandal, not as a mistake, but as a woman who had survived, who had endured, and who had grown stronger because of it. Days turned into weeks, and life settled into a rhythm both comforting and intimate. The hero continued his work, tending to the land and animals with quiet diligence, while the heroine embraced her own strength, mastering the skills needed to maintain the homestead and care for the child she carried. Their connection deepened, not in grand declarations but in small gestures, a shared glance across a fence, the careful passing of tools, the warmth of a hand brushing against another in passing. One morning, as the sun rose gold over the plains, the heroine stood at the edge of the pasture, feeling the life inside her with a serene reverence. The hero approached quietly, standing beside her, their shoulders brushing. He did not speak immediately, letting the silence stretch like a bridge over the years of fear and isolation she had endured. "You've changed," he said at last, voice soft, carrying no judgment, only awe. "Not just here," he gestured to the land, "but here," he placed a hand lightly over her chest, above the child growing within. "You've become someone unafraid, someone fierce, and beautiful. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they were not of sorrow, they were of recognition, of relief, and of a love she had never dared to imagine. I never thought I'd feel worthy of that," she whispered. "You are," he replied simply. "You've always been. It just took time for the world, and maybe even you, to see it." The weeks that followed brought not only safety, but joy. Spring rains nourished the earth, wildflowers bloomed, and birdsong filled the once lonely fields. The heroine's body shifted, preparing for the life she would bring into the world, and each kick and flutter reminded her of resilience and hope. The hero remained her steadfast companion, guiding, protecting, and loving without expectation, offering her freedom even as he anchored her in care and security. Finally, the past shadow loomed no longer. News from Red Willow trickled in, but it was muted, irrelevant. The town could no longer define her. She had redefined herself. Even those who had once mocked her could only watch from afar as she moved through life with dignity, strength, and the quiet glow of newfound love. The heroine and the hero shared a quiet evening by the fire, watching the child she carried stir under the warmth of her hand. "Do you think we'll be safe?" she asked softly. He took her hand, thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "We've earned that," he said, "and even if danger comes again, we face it together. No one will ever harm you or our child while I stand." A breeze swept through the open windows, carrying the scent of the plains, the promise of new beginnings, and the warmth of life reclaimed. The heroine leaned into him, heart full, eyes shining with trust and love. The firelight flickered across the cabin walls, illuminating the two figures who had endured, who had fought, who had grown. Outside, the world stretched wide, harsh and untamed, but no longer threatening. Within the safety of the cabin and the steadfast protection of the man who had chosen her, she felt a sense of completion, of triumph over cruelty and betrayal. She was no longer a woman abandoned or scorned. She was a mother-to-be, a partner, and a survivor. And the hero beside her, strong and unwavering, was more than protector. He was witness, ally, and the first hand to hold hers through joy and fear alike. The sun dipped low over the horizon, spilling gold across the plains. The heroine stood at the edge of the cabin porch, hand resting on her belly, and looked out over the vast open world. Beside her, the hero's presence was a promise, not only of protection, but of partnership. "We've survived the worst," she murmured. "Yes," he replied, his voice low, certain. "And now we live." The wind carried the scent of new grass and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere beyond the hills, life stretched into the future, bright, uncertain, yet theirs to claim. The child within her stirred once more, a small heartbeat echoing the rhythm of survival, hope, and love. She had faced betrayal, shame, and societal cruelty, but in the arms of the man who had seen her true worth, she found redemption, safety, and the quiet triumph of a heart finally awake. The plains stretched infinite, golden, and untamed, and for the first time, she did not fear them. She stepped forward, hand in his, toward the open fields, toward a future built on trust, courage, and love. Whatever storms might come, they would face them together. And she would never again stand alone.